So we've, I guess our group had been sort of going from the most general to the most specific. And my talk is going to introduce the project that we are going to be working on for the year. It's in its very early stages, but we'll share with you some of the ideas behind the project, and specifically responding to some of the ideas that Giorgio specifically had mentioned, but were also mentioned in passing in Chinyi and Cosman's presentations earlier. So the title of our project, tentatively, is called the Gaifeng Orchestra. So let me just break this down for you. Gaifeng is a Cantonese terminology which literally translates to people and individuals from your neighborhood. In Hong Kong, it's used mostly stemmed from these welfare organizations that were set up by the colonial government to provide social services to the influx of Chinese immigrants. These associations, of course, they provide, they're actually still very active. You can go to a Gaifeng association and receive sort of elderly services, as well as, what else do? They also give out like free bags of rice at these like Gaifeng association. And there will be concerts, there will be lectures, there will be karaoke. It's basically like a community center. But in the early days of the Gaifeng Association, they also basically served the function of district representative, because there was no sort of a democratic representative system. So it served that function. But the terminology specifically of Gaifeng embodies a couple of different imaginations. It's very complex. There are a number of things in it. So it includes the local stores that you go to, your favorite restaurant. It includes the park and the public spaces where you around which you are located, where you live. The sports group, the free activities that are provided to kids, and also, for example, the policeman who patrols your neighborhood, but who is obviously too unfit to be a police, but you know him very well and he's very nice. And also the crazy cat lady who's in your neighborhood, who it's a local celebrity that everybody knows. You know, and all of these are sort of a part of the imagination of what is your Gaifeng, what is your sort of neighbors. So that's one half of the project. The other half of the project, obviously, is the idea of orchestra. So I'm specifically interested in orchestra as a community-driven effort. So I'm looking specifically at community orchestras, not professional orchestras. So for example, what you see at the bottom there is a picture of the medical doctors orchestra, which is very popular around the world. But in Hong Kong, there's also the postman's orchestra, the nurses orchestra, the teachers orchestra, the civil servants orchestra, all kinds of different orchestras that are sort of organized around professions. But there are also orchestras that are organized around districts and neighborhoods that they serve. So my question is, I mean, who are these people who play and sustain and participate in the making and the development of these orchestras? How do they keep them financially afloat and sustainable? And where do they get their audience? And why are they interested in participating in this act of orchestra making? But the question of how, to me, is very important, because when you evoke the terminology of an orchestra, a couple of things are are happening. When a group of people get together to play music, they don't need to call themselves an orchestra. They could call themselves a band. They could call themselves a group. There are a number of terminologies, right? So when you're appropriating the terminology of an orchestra, a couple of things is happening. There's definitely appropriation happening. There's even maybe a level of hijacking of the term happening. There's a level of essentialization that is happening because they need to imagine what this ideal type of an orchestra is, and then they, through this act of self-organization, they replicate the ideal of what they imagine to be an orchestra. So I think community orchestras are specifically very interesting, particularly because in most of the cases, there are no state funding behind these community orchestras. Speaking of state funding, as we speak, there is actually an online petition going on against the systematic exclusion of local people from the Hong Kong Philharmonic Orchestra. So yesterday I was typing away on my computer. It's not because your talks were boring. They were very interesting. But I was just actually trying to make and finish this open letter. So if you look at the program of Hong Kong Phil's concert season in the coming year, there's 0 composition from local composers. There's no soloists from Hong Kong, and there's one conductor from Hong Kong in the program who is tokenistically dealt with in this Christmas program. So she's given the half of a Christmas program, but then the rest of the program is conducted by international conductors. So when the chairman of the board was questioned by SEMP on the lack of local representation, he came out with this ridiculous statement saying that the mandate for the Hong Kong Phil is to be an orchestra of world-class standard and not grooming Hong Kong composers or artists. And we are, of course, very angry, but this is entirely coincidental to our thinking about this project, but of course it's very much related. Sort of what does it imply when the chairman of the board of an orchestra comes out and say or imply that the attainment of world-class standard is contradictory to grooming and nurturing of local talents. I obviously have a personal connection to orchestra as well. I participated in orchestras as a child and also as a student. I actually played the double bass. So for those of you who know are familiar, it's I'm always all the way in the back, and you are the in a piece. Typically, double bass player would wait sort of 80% of the time, and you're only playing maybe before the cadence. So I have obviously a connection to the orchestra, but I also was very deeply aware of the fact that when I bring an instrument into an orchestra, I was participating in something that has already been formed and given, and then I think about what am I really doing, and what does it mean for me to be participating in this. But that is not the only way to engage with and interact with an orchestra. You can actively make orchestras or redefine orchestras. So for example, in Hong Kong, we have this very popular Chinese orchestra, which is also popular in other parts of Asia, which is basically a large ensemble in the configuration of an orchestra, except that it's made up entirely or mostly of Chinese instruments. So, but then because we have no bass strings in Chinese instruments, so we complement the ensemble with double basses, right? So you have the double basses and the cellos, and then you have Chinese instruments in the rest of the orchestra. So that's this very strange product that some people love, some people hate. But because it's such a strange monster, what it winds up having to do is that it needs to substantially commission new pieces, because that is what is going to keep it afloat and keep it alive, because it has no repertoire and no canonic repertoire to import and to rely on. So that's one way to make an orchestra, but many musical groups also appropriate the term of orchestra for no particularly good reason, but this allure, this aura surrounding the terminology, which makes it very interesting for people. So here's a toy orchestra from Israel. And then there's, of course, in the visual art, there's, you know, cat orchestra was a very popular reference in the 19th century. But you can probably think of other examples, but this is another way of engaging with the tradition of orchestra, not to participate in the orchestra, that's been sort of the tradition that's been given to you, but to actively make an orchestra and to orchestrate, to participate in orchestra making. And so I've done a little bit of experiment with that sort of thing through my work. This is a project back in 2012 called the Hong Kong iPhone Orchestra. I thought maybe part of the problem was that we are using instrument and we are sort of appropriating and adapting the performance practice of the instruments that's been given to us. So maybe the solution is to use instrument that nobody can claim that they cannot play. So then we ended up with, so this is a self-organized group. We did a lot of concert in 1 year. It's kind of a project that I haven't continued on doing. And then in 2004, I started this project called the Electric Company Laptop Orchestra, which so we make our own instrument and we write our own software. And so we appropriate the structure of self-organizing in an orchestra. So there's a conductor, there are ensemble members who play different parts, but then we make all of our own instruments. And this is a short clip of us playing. How long have I got? Okay, good. So that's the laptop orchestra. So I guess what are we really doing there? I'm not. I mean, of course, we are making an orchestra, but we are also engaging in this act of sort of creatively misreading an orchestra, or what it means to be an orchestra, and through creative misreading, this idea that a poet sort of misread and deliberately and consciously misreads one's predecessors' clear creative space for oneself. We are doing that through orchestration and orchestra making. And creative misreading is something that I plan to look into in our Gaifeng Orchestra project, but it's also, I guess, a recurrent theme in some of my other works. So in Hong Kong, there's actually a long tradition of popular musicians randomly filling in lyrics for classical music tunes to a point where the song gets so, like the popular song gets so popular that nobody remembers the classical origin of the song. So a very famous singer, Lim Zicheng, he has one of his most well-known songs is called the Number Song, in which he randomly filled in numbers for the Bach G minor minuet. So it goes something like 3062470, 3062470. So it's all random numbers. That means nothing. But it's so popular that nobody knows and remember the origin anymore. Everyone, when they hear the G minuet, they think of these random strange string of numbers, which I think is a perfect way to corrupt something. And so I created this project called Memorizing the Twist Time Chord, which is, I guess, inspired and informed by that. There are seven, okay, I'll just finish with this project then. There's this one chord called the twist time chord, which is right at the beginning of Wagner's opera. And it's an important chord for a music student because it's seen as a very important moment in music history and yada-da. And so we studied it, memorized it. And like any good Hong Kong student, the way to memorize something and to learn something is to make up random Cantonese text and map it to the sonic phenomena in question that you're trying to remember. It works for English text. So for example, if I want to remember how to pronounce international, then I would write on top of international, international, which means nothing except like some strange combination of milk and breakfast cereal and his way or something, right? Just random characters. But because Cantonese has 9 tonal inflections, it helps you remember the sonic phenomenon in question. So here, I sit with 70 participants that I have recruited through an open call, and I make them learn the notes leading up to and following the twist time chord with me. And on the spot, they come up with their own lyrics to map onto the contour of the chord, and then they sing it to the camera many times. And so they memorize it and internalize it. So for those of you who know the opera, this is, so like some of the texts are like very, like sort of, I guess, Freudian even. But some of the texts are actually, that people come up with are very political, and then others are nonsensical and funny. But then everyone come up with their way of sort of filling in lyrics for the twist line chord. So the idea is not only to generate these songs, but to plant earworms in their head so that next time when they walk into a Wagner opera, right at the beginning of the opera, they remember these and nothing about what the opera is about, even just for a moment. Albeit temporarily, I have corrupted that moment for them, and that is great. But then, of course, the opera goes on. I can't do anything about that, but at least there's a small moment when the opera has been corrupted. So, thank you.